What started as a simple morning show interview turned into one of the most unforgettable television moments ever caught on camera. It began like any other press appearance. Samuel L. Jackson, one of Hollywood's most respected icons, had a brand new film to promote. His schedule was packed with back-to-back interviews, but this one on Good Morning America would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Samuel L. Jackson to completely lose it on live television. Jackson arrived at the studio calm, professional, and ready. He greeted the crew warmly, flashing that signature smile everyone knew and loved. The air felt normal, at least at first. But as soon as he sat across from host Michael Strahan, something shifted. There was a strange tension, a faint chill that didn't belong in a morning show setting. "Samuel L. Jackson, welcome back to Good Morning America," Strahan said, his voice bright and TV perfect. But beneath the polished tone, there was something else, something sharp. Jackson noticed it instantly. His instincts, honed by years of interviews, told him this wasn't going to be a typical friendly chat. "Good to be here, Michael," Jackson replied smoothly, leaning back in his chair, reading the room like only he could. Strahan flipped through his cue cards, giving a practiced smile. "So, let's talk about your new film," he began. But then came the twist. "But first, I think our viewers would like to hear more about some of the comments you've made recently about the industry. You've been pretty vocal lately." Jackson's brow lifted just slightly. That wasn't part of the plan. His publicist had already gone over the questions with the producers. The focus was supposed to be on the film, the director, and the cast. Not this. "Well, Michael," Jackson began carefully, "I've always believed in being honest about my experiences. I think it's important to speak truthfully about the challenges we face in this business." Strahan nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Right. But some people might say that when you've had the kind of career you've had, maybe it's time to focus on the positive, instead of always talking about what's wrong." The studio fell quiet for a moment. Jackson's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. "I'm sorry," he said evenly. "Are you suggesting that being honest about serious issues is somehow inappropriate? I was told we'd be discussing my film, not my personal philosophy." Strahan leaned forward, his tone smooth but condescending. "Hey, I'm just saying what some people think. You got this reputation for being outspoken, but maybe sometimes you come off a little too aggressive." "Aggressive?" Jackson repeated, slowly and deliberately. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "That's an interesting choice of words, Michael. Do you use that word for everyone who speaks their mind? Or just certain people?" You could feel the shift immediately. The air grew heavy, and the studio audience went completely still. Strahan could have redirected, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned further into the confrontation, thinking he could control it. "Look, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth," Strahan said, lifting his hands like a peacekeeper. "I just wonder if you ever think about how your comments sound to regular people, everyday Americans who just want to be entertained." Jackson didn't hesitate. "Michael, do you think people watching this show can't handle honest conversations? Do you think they're too simple to understand that an actor can both entertain and have opinions about real life?" For a second, Strahan froze. The question caught him completely off guard, and his smooth, on-camera confidence cracked. "That's not what I'm saying," he muttered. "Then what are you saying?" Jackson pressed, leaning forward now. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're suggesting I should just smile, keep quiet, and pretend everything's perfect. Is that what this interview is supposed to be?" "I just think," Strahan started, but Jackson cut him off. "No, let me finish," Jackson said, his tone controlled but powerful. "I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've worked with some of the best directors alive. I've made films that have made people laugh, cry, and think. I've never apologized for having an opinion. If that makes me aggressive in your book, then we clearly have different definitions of the word." The tension was now unmistakable. Behind the cameras, producers were gesturing frantically, unsure whether to cut to commercial. But both men were locked in, neither backing down. "Look, Sam," Strahan said suddenly, using the nickname like a weapon. The casual tone didn't land as friendly. It landed as patronizing. "I respect you. But maybe you forget that not everyone sees the world your way. Sometimes people just want to hear about the movie without all the extra stuff." Jackson's head tilted slightly. "Sam, so we're on first-name terms now. Interesting. And let me make sure I understand. You think people can't handle a deeper conversation? You think your viewers are that shallow?" "I think they appreciate honesty," Strahan shot back. "And honestly, sometimes it feels like you're more focused on making a point than connecting with people." Jackson's expression hardened. "Michael, every film I make, every interview I do is about connecting with people. The difference is, I don't treat audiences like children. I give them credit for thinking beyond surface-level fluff." Now, the studio was holding its breath. This was no longer an interview. It was a standoff. Strahan's face tightened. He could sense the power slipping away from him, and instead of diffusing the tension, he decided to push harder, a risky move that would soon prove disastrous. "You know what, Samuel?" he began, deliberately emphasizing the full name this time. "I've been doing television for a long time, and I've interviewed hundreds of celebrities. Most of them understand there's a time and a place for everything. When you come on a morning show, people are drinking their coffee, getting ready for work. They want something light, something positive." Jackson's response came with lightning precision. "So now you're the authority on what people want?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "You've decided your audience can't handle anything more than small talk and weather updates? That's your take?" "That's not what I said," Strahan snapped, visibly frustrated. "That's exactly what you said," Jackson countered. "You just told me that morning viewers can't handle a real conversation. You basically called your own audience shallow. But somehow I'm the one who's out of line for giving them more credit." The audience could feel it. The tension was electric. Strahan's polished charm was starting to crumble, replaced by a defensive edge. "Look," he said, struggling to steady his voice, "I know you think you're making some profound point here, but this is Good Morning America, not a classroom lecture. People tune in for entertainment, not a debate." "Lecture?" Jackson repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Michael, expressing an opinion isn't a lecture. It's called being human. But I guess in your world, celebrities are supposed to act like trained seals. Clap, smile, and say what you want to hear. That's ridiculous, and you know it." Strahan's tone sharpened, his calm demeanor long gone. "I've interviewed thousands of people, and most of them can have a conversation without turning it into some kind of social statement." Jackson leaned back slightly, his gaze steady and unflinching. The look on his face was one movie fans knew all too well, the kind that came right before one of his legendary monologues. "A social statement?" Jackson said quietly. "Tell me, when did speaking about respect become political? When did suggesting that audiences are intelligent become controversial? I came here to talk about my work. You're the one who turned this into something else." Strahan forced a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "We can still talk about the movie," he said tightly. "But before we do, maybe we should address what a lot of people are thinking. Some say you've become too comfortable using your platform to push your personal agenda." Jackson froze. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice was calm. Dangerously calm. "My personal agenda," he repeated. "And what exactly would that be?" Strahan hesitated, but pressed on, clearly thinking he could handle it. "You know, you're always talking about inequality, about how Hollywood treats certain people differently. Some think those are conversations that should stay separate from entertainment. Jackson went completely still. Some people think that, do they? His voice was now almost a whisper. The entire studio knew that tone. It was the calm before the storm. Then Jackson leaned forward, his gaze locked on Strahan. Michael, let me ask you something. When you wake up in the morning, do you get to decide whether or not your race affects how people treat you that day? The room went silent. The audience stopped breathing. Even the crew behind the cameras froze in place. That's not what this is about, Strahan stammered, his confidence visibly cracking. No. Answer the question, Jackson insisted. Can you choose that? Because I can't. So when you tell me to separate my personal experiences from my work, what you're really saying is that who I am, what I live, should be hidden, because it makes people uncomfortable. Strahan looked lost now, scrambling for control. You're putting words in my mouth. I never said anything about that. Jackson tilted his head slightly. Didn't you? Because it sure sounds like you think that certain topics, certain truths, don't belong in polite conversation. That's completely unfair, Strahan said quickly. I'm just saying some things might not be appropriate for this time slot. Jackson let out a short, humorless laugh. Appropriate for the audience, he repeated slowly. So being honest about my experiences is inappropriate now. You've spent the entire interview questioning my right to speak my mind. And now you want to pretend that's not what's happening? Let's get back on track, Strahan said, his voice strained. Why don't we talk about the film? That's what people want to hear. Jackson gave him a hard look. Now you want to talk about the film, after spending 10 minutes telling me how I should act, think, and speak. How convenient. Strahan leaned forward again, desperate to recover his footing. I never told you how to act. I just said there are better places for some discussions. Jackson's tone dropped, calm but cutting. You mean real discussions? Ones that actually matter? The kind that might make your viewers think? I think my viewers just want a normal conversation. Strahan shot back. Jackson's patience was gone. He sat up straighter, his voice carrying the full weight of someone who'd had enough. The reason I'm here, he said firmly, is because your producers invited me to talk about my work, but clearly what you wanted was for me to sit here, smile, and say nothing of substance. That's not true, Strahan protested. Then explain this, Jackson said, his tone like steel. Explain why a conversation about my film turned into you questioning my right to speak freely. Explain why you think it's okay to tell me what's appropriate for your audience. Strahan turned to the camera, trying to salvage the moment. I think everyone watching can see what's happening here. I asked reasonable questions, and instead of having a simple conversation, we've got accusations. Jackson's voice cut through the air like a blade. You just did it again, Michael. You dismissed what I said as accusations instead of acknowledging the issue. You've been patronizing since the second I sat down. Now you're playing the victim. The silence was thick enough to touch. You could hear every breath, every nervous shuffle from the audience. I've been nothing but professional, Strahan said, his voice trembling slightly. Professional, Jackson repeated with a short laugh. Michael, you've questioned my integrity, dismissed my intelligence, and implied that I should just keep quiet. If that's professionalism, maybe we're working with different definitions. The studio lights felt hotter now. The tension was unbearable, and everyone watching could tell that this wasn't going to end smoothly. Strahan straightened his tie, clearly trying to keep his composure, but his frustration was showing. You know what, Samuel? He said finally, his tone sharp and defensive. Maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Maybe the problem is that you're just not used to people treating you like a regular guest. Maybe you expect special treatment. The words dropped like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the camera crew froze. Everyone knew Strahan had just crossed a line. Jackson didn't move for several seconds. He just stared at Strahan, his expression unreadable, Then, in a low, calm voice, he repeated, "Special treatment?" His tone was ice cold. "Michael, did you just say that expecting respect and professionalism is asking for special treatment?" Strahan blinked, realizing too late that he'd made a terrible mistake. "I'm just saying every guest gets the same treatment," he said quickly. "I ask tough questions. That's my job." "Tough questions?" Jackson said, his voice rising just enough to make the microphones crackle. "Michael, you haven't asked me one question about my work. Not one about my craft, my preparation, or the film I came here to discuss. You've spent the entire time trying to paint me as difficult, as if I should be grateful to sit here and be insulted on your show." "That's not what happened," Strahan shot back, his voice breaking slightly. "You're twisting my words." Jackson leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Am I? Or are you realizing that this little stunt of yours didn't go the way you thought it would?" The room went silent again. Jackson stood up, abruptly unhooking his microphone. The sound of the clip being removed was sharp, final, like the crack of a whip. "Michael," Jackson said evenly, "let me tell you exactly what happened here. You decided, before I even walked in, that you were going to challenge me. You thought you could score points by putting me in my place. But you misjudged me, badly." Strahan's voice came out shaky. "Sit down, Samuel. We're not finished here." Jackson turned, eyes blazing. "Oh, we're finished." His voice carried the kind of authority that silenced every whisper in the room. "Let me make this clear. You don't get to tell me to sit down. You don't get to call my perspective an agenda. And you definitely don't get to act like treating someone with dignity is some kind of special favor." "You're overreacting," Strahan said, his words weak, almost pleading now. Jackson let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Overreacting? Michael, you've spent 20 minutes trying to corner me, trying to make me look unreasonable. And now that you're losing control, you're calling me emotional. Do you hear yourself?" Strahan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He glanced around for support, but the faces staring back at him told him everything he needed to know. The producers, the audience, even the camera crew. No one was on his side. "Look," Strahan said finally, his voice cracking. "Maybe we both got a little heated. Let's just move on." Jackson shook his head slowly. "No, Michael. You got heated. I got disrespected. There's a difference." He stood there holding the small microphone in his hand. "You came into this interview with an agenda, and when I didn't play along, you decided to get personal. Congratulations. You got exactly the reaction you wanted." "Wait. Samuel," Strahan said quickly, realizing how bad this looked. "We can work this out. Don't walk out. Not on live TV." Jackson turned, giving him one final look that could have stopped a clock. "Work this out? There's nothing to work out. You've shown me exactly who you are." "Please," Strahan said, his voice barely a whisper now. "Don't do this." Jackson paused, the studio completely still. "You know what the most pathetic part of this is," he said softly. "You actually think you're the victim here. You think being called out for disrespect makes you the wronged one. You planned this. You wanted to make a scene. You just didn't expect it to backfire." "I never meant for this to happen," Strahan said, almost under his breath. "Yes, you did," Jackson replied coldly. "You meant for exactly this to happen. You just thought I'd sit here, smile, and thank you for it. But those days are gone." With that, he placed the microphone down carefully on the table, the sound echoing through the quiet set. "To everyone watching," Jackson said, turning to the camera, "I'm sorry your morning show turned into this, but sometimes standing up for yourself means not staying quiet when you're disrespected." "Samuel, please." Strahan tried again, but Jackson didn't stop. "No, Michael," he said firmly. "You've said enough. I've said enough." He started walking off the set, his steps deliberate and heavy with purpose. Just before exiting, he stopped, turned back toward Strahan, and said, "And just so we're clear, This isn't about being difficult. This is about not tolerating disrespect. No one, no matter how big their platform is, gets to talk down to me. As he disappeared behind the curtain, the studio was left in stunned silence. The audience whispered in disbelief. Strahan sat there, frozen, looking completely defeated. The cameras kept rolling. The red light on top of the main lens blinked like an alarm. Strahan finally looked into it and muttered, "Oh, we'll be right back," his voice barely audible. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Producers scrambled to fill the segment. Assistants were on the phone, and everyone knew they just witnessed a moment that would be replayed on every entertainment network in the country. For all his years in television, Strahan had never experienced anything like this. What was meant to be a light-hearted chat about a new movie had turned into a fiery clash about respect, authenticity, and identity. And it was all caught live. The irony was hard to miss. Strahan had set out to make Jackson look confrontational, but by the end, it was Strahan who looked unprofessional, defensive, and completely out of his depth. Jackson's final words echoed through the minds of everyone in the studio. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means walking away. The segment ended, but the conversation it sparked was just beginning.